You have 30 seconds to step away from the satellite dish or we'll assume hostile intent, barked a voice from the shadows as floodlights lit up the backyard like it was noon in Times Square. Karen froze mid-swing, wrench in hand, still halfway up the ladder she dragged over the fence. Sirens screamed in the distance, but the black SUVs were already here, tires screeching, doors flung open, men in tactical gear fanning out across the property like they were breaching a cartel hideout. "Ma'am, that dish is classified military infrastructure," shouted one of them, aiming what looked suspiciously like a biometric scanner right at her. "You just triggered a federal breach alert." Karen's face morphed from smug righteousness to pale horror in under 2 seconds, her voice trembling as she tried to say, "I was just trying to make him follow the HOA rules." The whole saga actually started that morning when I stepped outside with a coffee in hand and a content sigh on my lips. The backyard was humming, literally. My dish, which I affectionately called Skywalker, was locked onto a Dodd relay satellite circling 22,000 miles above my quiet suburban home. As a former Army signal officer turned federal defense contractor, I worked on a highly classified domestic signal relay operation. Nothing flashy, just intercepts, encrypted data, and a job that required me to never, ever let that dish lose connection. I was wearing flip-flops and humming an old Beatles tune when I spotted it. A crisp white envelope duct-taped to my front door. Not just taped aggressively, like someone had tried to staple it to the wood and settled for industrial adhesive. I peeled it off and read the bold heading, "Notice of Violation. Unapproved satellite apparatus." And just like that, I knew it was going to be one of those weeks. I turned around, and right on cue, there she was, Karen, the HOA president, a human embodiment of peach-colored polyester and misplaced authority. She was standing on her porch, hands on hips, lips pursed so tight they looked stapled. She waved with her clipboard like it was a royal decree and shouted, "You'll need to take that thing down immediately. It's against the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood." I blinked, sipped my coffee, and tried to keep my sarcasm from boiling over. "You mean the dish?" Karen nodded vigorously, striding over in her neon sneakers like she was heading into combat. "Yes, the monstrosity. It's causing an eyesore, and the board voted that all dishes must be no more than 20 inches in diameter and must not be visible from the street." "Well, good news," I replied calmly. "This one's only visible from orbit." She squinted, confused, clearly missing the joke. "I'm serious. This is your only warning. Remove it within 24 hours, or you'll be fined $1,000 per day." I studied her for a beat. She wasn't just bluffing. She genuinely believed her little HOA club had the authority to override national defense protocols. That was impressive in the same way watching someone stick a fork in a toaster is impressive. "Karen," I said gently, "you might want to walk that threat back. That dish is, well, it's not quite the DirecTV unit you think it is." She laughed, sharp and nasal. "What are you, with NASA or something?" "Not quite." But she was already storming off, waving her clipboard in victory. "Clock's ticking, dish boy." I went back inside and closed the blinds, sighing as I entered the secured garage. Most people have lawnmowers and tools in their garages. I had 6 screens, a biometric scanner, 3 encrypted routers, and a dedicated satellite uplink. My phone vibrated. It was a security ping from the Dodd. Someone had filed a public inquiry about unauthorized military gear in a residential zone. I didn't even have to guess who. Karen had probably Googled how to report spy satellites and found some outdated FAA form. A few hours later, I heard the scratching sound of her voice outside again. She was giving a walking tour of the block to some poor teenager in a fake HOA intern shirt, pointing at random homes and shaking her head dramatically. "See that gnome? Violation. See that mailbox? Non-standard font. And that dish? Threat to democracy, possibly Russian." I couldn't take it anymore. I flipped on the external security cameras and hit record. The footage of Karen pointing at my satellite dish while calling it military cosplay was too good to waste. I sent the clip to my old Army group chat. 5 minutes later, the jokes were flying in. "Give her the Area 51 welcome. Deploy tactical garden gnomes. Tell her that dish is a decoy and the real one's inside the barbecue. I was laughing until my phone pinged again, this time from a different alert. The perimeter motion sensor in the backyard had gone off. I flipped to camera 6 and nearly choked on my drink. Karen was in my backyard, with a ladder. The woman had dragged an aluminum ladder across her lawn, climbed my fence, and was now wobbling halfway up, a wrench clutched in one hand. She was trying to unscrew the bolts on the satellite mount. It was absurd. It was insane. And unfortunately for her, it was also a breach of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. Interference with federal property. The system didn't need my input. The alarm had already triggered. A silent code went out to the local command center. I heard it before I saw it, the distant thump of tires on asphalt, the rush of wind from spinning rotors. I rushed outside just as the black SUVs rounded the corner. Karen looked up and saw the lights flash across her body. She froze, still on the ladder. A megaphone crackled. Step down from the equipment and put your tools on the ground. It was like watching a raccoon get caught raiding a tactical warehouse. Her face was stunned, then terrified, then confused. "I'm with the HOA," she shrieked, trying to climb down. I crossed my arms and stood at the edge of the patio as a federal agent approached me. "She triggered the proximity alarm," he said, shaking his head. "You want to press charges." I looked at Karen, now surrounded by 3 armed officers, and looking like she might throw up. For a moment, I considered going easy. Then I remembered the duct tape. "I'll let you know," I replied with a small grin. "But she might want to get familiar with federal forms. Because the dish is staying." Karen's reputation had already taken a hit the moment those unmarked SUVs rolled into our peaceful cul-de-sac like it was a Navy SEAL extraction mission. But by the time the federal agents let her go with a warning and a strongly worded citation, her image as the unstoppable queen of HOA enforcement was beginning to fracture. Still, if there's one thing Karen had in abundance besides pastel tracksuits and laminated rule books, it was delusion. The next morning, while most sane people would have laid low and maybe baked a humble pie, Karen doubled down. She called an emergency HOA board meeting, issued flyers door to door like she was running for office, and even tacked a bulletin to the community park notice board with the title, "Crisis in Our Neighborhood. One man's satellite is everyone's problem." I watched all this unfold from my front window while sipping a second cup of coffee. She had even added bullet points beneath the title, including property values in jeopardy, possible radiation risk, and my personal favorite, unvetted surveillance threat. I briefly wondered if she had consulted a conspiracy subreddit before typing this all out in Comic Sans. Her meeting was set for 7:00 p.m. in the HOA clubhouse, and naturally I decided to attend, not to argue, but purely for the sport of it. That evening, the small clubhouse filled quickly with residents, many of them holding copies of Karen's flyer. A few had shown up purely out of curiosity, others with mild concern, and a few with popcorn. Karen stood at the front like a kindergarten teacher about to read a story, clutching a microphone like it was the holy grail of HOA righteousness. Behind her, a hastily taped paper sign read "Emergency Measures. Dish Dismantling Initiative." Her voice was sharp, her tone theatrical as she launched into her speech about the satellite menace. "Fellow residents, it's with a heavy heart and a determined spirit that I bring this to your attention," she began. "We are under threat, not just visually, but ethically. That dish," she said, stabbing her finger toward a photo of my roof taped to the wall, "is an unregulated and hazardous blight on our peaceful community. It has already attracted military-grade agents into our neighborhood. What next? Drones? Tanks?" There were chuckles from the back, but she pressed on undeterred, talking about possible EMF exposure and how her poodle, Muffin, had been anxious ever since the incident. At one point, she claimed to have felt her feelings buzz while walking by my property, suggesting the dish was interfering with her dental work. I sat quietly in a chair near the back, arms folded, trying not to laugh. The real kicker came when she called for a formal vote to ban all visible satellite dishes in the community, retroactive to 3 weeks prior. conveniently covering her first complaint against me. Before she could start passing around a clipboard for signatures, a resident stood up. His name was Jackson, a retired Navy radar tech who moved here for peace and good fishing. "Karen," he said loudly, "you do realize what that dish is, right? You're not dealing with some bootleg pirate satellite stealing sports channels. That's federal gear." Karen huffed. "It doesn't matter who it belongs to. Rules are rules." Jackson grinned. "Actually, it does matter. If you touch it again, you're probably looking at 5 years minimum. Interfering with a government system isn't like trimming someone's overgrown hedge." The room went quiet. Karen looked ready to scream, but before she could respond, another hand shot up. This time it was Layla, a software engineer who lived 2 doors down from me. "Also, Karen," she added, "you sent out a neighborhood-wide email saying he might be a foreign agent. That's borderline defamation." Karen's face flushed deep red. "It's not defamation if it's true." "You literally don't know what he does," Layla shot back. "And honestly, I feel safer knowing someone with federal clearance lives here. You just started a small war with the Pentagon." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying every second. Karen sputtered through a few more accusations, claimed she had contacted a local reporter, and then, in the most glorious moment of the night, pulled out a letter she claimed was from her cousin at a regional oversight media bureau. She waved it around like it was the Magna Carta, saying the journalist was going to expose the surveillance scandal in our community. The timing couldn't have been better. My phone buzzed. A secure message came in. It was from my handler at the Dodd Glazen office. Apparently, Karen's cousin had actually submitted a story draft to a local blog, and their monitoring team had picked it up. Since the dish installation was classified, her little media stunt had officially triggered an external audit flag. The agency now considered Karen a potential source of a national breach. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji and tucked my phone away. The meeting descended into chaos as several board members started arguing. One pointed out that the HOA bylaws couldn't override federal jurisdiction. Another asked why Karen didn't get the board's approval before sending out threats to a government contractor. Eventually, the meeting was adjourned with no resolution except that Karen's motion was blocked pending legal review. As people trickled out, I caught snippets of conversation. A teenager whispered to his dad, "Is he like a spy or something?" His dad replied, "Maybe, but at least he's not insane." Back at home, I checked the external cameras again. Karen had retreated, but not for long. Around midnight, the motion detector pinged again. This time she wasn't alone. She had dragged along 2 other residents. One of them looked like her golf partner, trying to convince them that the dish was humming again. They crouched behind a row of bushes like amateur wildlife photographers, staring at the equipment like it was about to lift off into space. I made sure to save the footage, not for evidence, for entertainment. The next morning, I received an official knock on the door. It wasn't the police. It was a uniformed officer in a black jacket with a patch that simply said U.S. Com Ops. He introduced himself, asked for my clearance ID, and then stepped inside. Apparently, the situation had escalated faster than expected. The agency didn't just want to warn Karen. They were considering activating a clause in my contract that allowed for education-based community engagement in areas compromised by civilian interference. Translation, I asked. "You're going to hold a friendly little town hall," he said with a grin. "Educate them on why the dish exists, but don't tell them everything, just enough to shut them up." I nodded, already imagining Karen's reaction when she found herself listening to a real federal officer talk about satellite uplinks and secure national infrastructure. And just like that, Operation Enlighten OOA was officially underway. It started with a missing gnome, not just any gnome, but the one that had been proudly standing beside my mailbox for 2 years, wearing a tiny camel uniform and holding a miniature American flag. One morning, it was simply gone. No broken pieces, no note, no trace. I might have chalked it up to kids being dumb until I checked the footage. At 2:13 a.m., a hunched figure crept across my lawn, wearing what looked like a hoodie and ski goggles. The figure paused beside the gnome, picked it up, whispered something to it, and vanished into the night. The next day, a flyer showed up on every mailbox in the neighborhood. On the front was a blurry photo of my satellite dish, circled in red, with the headline, "You are being watched." Underneath, in shaky font, were questions like, "Is this legal? What is really being broadcast? And how safe is your family?" Karen had finally gone full guerrilla. I had to hand it to her. She was persistent. After being publicly humiliated, legally shut down, and advised by federal agents to cease and desist, she was now resorting to psychological warfare. Her plan seemed to be to create a sense of mystery and fear among the neighbors. But unfortunately for her, most of them had already chosen a side, and it wasn't hers. One neighbor, an elderly gentleman named Victor, actually taped the flyer to his grill and lit it on fire while grilling ribs. Another neighbor sarcastically posted on the HOA Facebook group, "Breaking. Local dish controls mines. Tells me to buy more snacks." Still, Karen wasn't doing this alone. She had gathered a small but noisy group of HOA loyalists who were feeding off the drama. They started leaving chalk markings in front of my driveway, whispering about energy points. At one point, a lawn care guy refused to mow near the dish, saying a lady told him it was radioactive. The situation was spiraling, but not in the way Karen expected. Every stunt made her look more unhinged, and that's when I decided it was time to take a different approach. I made a call to my old contact in psychological operations. Yes, that's a real thing, and asked him for advice on managing civilian paranoia in a non-combat zone. He laughed for 5 straight minutes and then said, "Make it weirder. Feed the fear. Confuse the narrative. Let them drown in their own assumptions." It was sneaky, but effective. The next morning, I installed a completely fake keypad beside the dish, with a sign that read, "Authorized access only. Level 7 clearance required." The keypad didn't do anything, but it lit up when you touched it. I knew Karen would notice, and she did. That same night, she was spotted peeking through someone's bushes with binoculars. A few days later, I upped the ante. I mounted a decoy camera on my chimney and had it rotate slowly back and forth, scanning the street beneath it. I nailed a wooden sign to the grass that read, "Civilian cooperation in progress. Thank you for your service." That alone set off another storm of HOA gossip. Someone posted a grainy, zoomed-in photo of the camera online with the caption, "This is not normal." The replies were even better. "What if it's for aliens? Looks like he's preparing for World War II. Does anyone know if he's single?" Then came the town hall, the real one. A second, unscheduled meeting called by Karen herself. She didn't notify the board. She didn't reserve the clubhouse properly. She just showed up, flipped on the lights, and started shouting into a megaphone like a doomsday preacher. I walked in halfway through out of pure curiosity, only to find her pacing the stage with a massive binder in her arms. She was calling it the Dish Files. She had diagrams, conspiracy printouts, email chains that looked edited in Microsoft Paint, and a long list of suspicious activities she documented. She accused me of hacking her Wi-Fi, causing her microwave to short-circuit, and even manipulating her dreams. At one point, she held up a blurry infrared photo of my backyard and screamed, "He's harvesting radiation." To her disappointment, the audience didn't gasp. They giggled. One guy asked if she'd been drinking. Someone else filmed the whole thing and uploaded it to TikTok under the tag hashtag HOA Meltdown. Within hours, it had over 30,000 views and counting. The caption read, "Karen thinks her neighbor is the Pentagon." The next day, the Royal FOA Board issued a public statement. Karen was suspended from all HOA duties pending a formal vote. Her access to communications, files, and authority was revoked immediately. Her key card to the clubhouse was deactivated, and a neighborhood-wide email went out informing residents that recent actions by a former board member do not reflect the values of our community. It was a clean, polite way of saying she'd lost her mind and no longer represented anyone. But that didn't stop her. She took to the street, literally. Karen began standing on the corner with a handmade sign that read, "Wake up." This is a military occupation. She printed shirts. She handed out buttons. She posted QR codes to a website she made through a free builder that claimed to expose my deep state plot. I knew she was unraveling when she started including crop circles in her presentations. She even mailed a letter to the city council accusing me of creating behavioral control pulses. It would have been hilarious if it weren't so sad. The Dade, however, was no longer amused. The attention she was generating online was attracting interest from bloggers, podcasters, and even a few fringe media groups. One particularly aggressive YouTube channel reached out to me for a statement, asking if I would comment on my government frequency node. I forwarded the message straight to my handler. An hour later, I received an encrypted reply. Karen is now considered a civilian escalation risk. Stand by for official mitigation. 2 days later, 2 suited agents arrived at Karen's house, not in black SUVs this time, just a civilian vehicle and friendly smiles. They introduced themselves as representatives of the Department of Infrastructure Compliance and invited her for a non-confrontational review discussion. She went willingly, even proudly, assuming she was going to expose me. What she didn't realize was that the moment she stepped into that car, she was being escorted to a formal debriefing session at a regional intelligence facility. No charges, no threats, just an overwhelming reality check delivered by professionals. She returned that evening pale, quiet, and shaken. For the first time in weeks, she didn't patrol the street. She didn't post flyers. She didn't stare at the dish. She simply closed her blinds and stayed inside. And just like that, the storm passed. The dish remained untouched. My yard was peaceful. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Karen might have been silenced, but humiliation like hers doesn't vanish. It mutates. And as I installed a new gnome to replace the one she stole, this one holding binoculars and wearing a little headset, I smiled and whispered to it, "Stay sharp, soldier. We're not done yet." By the time the town was still buzzing over the chaotic HOA meeting, I was already prepping for what the agency had codenamed Operation Enlighten Hawaii. It sounded like a soft diplomacy effort in a war zone, and honestly, that wasn't far off. Karen hadn't just embarrassed herself. She had poked a classified hornet's nest with a floral garden rake. The fallout hadn't settled, and her paranoia had only escalated. Word had it she was now keeping a handwritten log of suspicious radio waves, and someone spotted her outside wearing a tinfoil-lined sun hat. I wasn't about to correct her. I had more important work to do. The agency sent me a discreet package the next day. Inside was a sleek laptop, a thumb drive labeled Sci-V Brief, and a set of guidelines for my upcoming educational community briefing. The instructions were clear. Keep it vague, stress national importance, and do not, under any circumstances, disclose the exact function of the satellite dish. They even included a few dramatized slides with animations, how satellites maintain secure communications, why redundancy matters, and the role of civilian assets in supporting national security. My favorite slide simply said, "Without this dish, America hears less and risks more." Subtle. While I was setting up the presentation, the neighborhood seemed to fall into a strange divided rhythm. Half of the residents had started treating me like a low-key national hero. One neighbor brought over a plate of cookies with a note that said, "Thanks for keeping us safe. Please ignore Karen." Another offered to help set up chairs for the town hall. The other half, mostly Karen loyalists or people too confused to form an opinion, whispered when I walked by. A few asked point blank if I worked for the CIA. I smiled and said nothing. The ambiguity was doing wonders. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't going down without another swing. A few nights before the meeting, I noticed more activity on my security cams. Karen had been sneaking out with her 2 friends, her self-appointed watch team, and marking my sidewalk with pink chalk symbols. It looked like some kind of cult map. When I reviewed the footage, I heard her mutter things like, "This is the signal center, and we'll triangulate it by the weekend." She had even taped a smartphone to a tennis racket, claiming it improved signal reception. I uploaded the footage to my private server and saved it in a folder I labeled HOA Science Fair. The night of the meeting arrived. The clubhouse was packed again, but this time the tone was completely different. No flyers, no conspiracy ramblings, Just rows of curious residents sitting in folding chairs, a projector humming, and me standing in front in jeans and a collared shirt, trying not to look like I just came from a classified briefing, which, to be fair, I had. I opened the laptop and clicked on the first slide. "Thanks for coming, everyone," I said. "I've been authorized, yes, authorized, to give you a basic overview of why the satellite dish on my property is not only compliant with federal law, but also essential to national operations." There were a few raised eyebrows and murmurs, but the room quieted down as the presentation began. I walked them through the basics, how satellite communications work, how some installations are placed in suburban zones for signal optimization, and why local regulations can't override federal deployment. I dropped in just enough technical jargon to sound official and sprinkled in references to Joint Task Defense Coordination and data relay assurance protocols. By slide 5, people were nodding like they understood it. By slide 8, they looked impressed. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for, the final slide. I clicked, and a short video played, footage of a government base receiving encrypted satellite transmission. I had added subtitles that read, "This is the chain your neighborhood is helping protect." It was vague. It was powerful. And it hit the mark. Karen stood up near the back, arms crossed. "So what you're saying is you're using our neighborhood as a military test zone." I gave a casual shrug. "Not quite. But you could say we're part of the country's larger shield. You're welcome." Someone laughed. Then someone clapped. Then more joined in. The applause grew, and I watched Karen's face twist into something between fury and confusion. She looked at the people around her as if betrayed. Someone nearby muttered, "Well, that explains the SUVs." Another person whispered, "I kind of feel safer now." She tried to regain control. "This still doesn't explain why you didn't ask the HOA for permission." I nodded politely, because I legally didn't need to. And even if I did, the Department of Defense doesn't file forms with neighborhood boards. No offense. The room chuckled again, this time louder. Karen's face flushed, and she stormed out, her heels clacking with every step. I ended the presentation with a thank you and a reminder. Please don't climb my fence, and if you see anything suspicious, call literally anyone but Karen. After the meeting, residents lingered to ask questions. Some were genuinely curious. Others just wanted to gossip. One guy asked if he could get a dish too. Another whispered, "Are we going to be on a list now?" I reassured them that unless they tampered with the equipment, they were fine. As people filtered out, I spotted Jackson, the retired radar tech, leaning by the wall with a smug grin. "You handled that like a pro," he said. "I give it a solid Bravo Zulu." "Thanks," I replied. "Let's hope Karen doesn't go for round 3. He laughed. "If she does, let me know. I've got some old jammer deer we can test out." Just kidding. Mostly. The next morning, my doorbell rang. It was Paula, Karen's vice president from the HOA. She looked sheepish and held a clipboard. "I just wanted to let you know the board voted last night to officially exempt your dish from all HOA visibility rules. You're now off the grid, so to speak." I thanked her, and she hesitated before adding, "And between us, there's also a motion on the table to remove Karen from her position. She's becoming a liability." I closed the door with a satisfied smile. The war wasn't over yet, but the tides had turned. Karen had gone from feared enforcer to desperate conspiracist, and now even her own people were starting to distance themselves. The dish was safe, the mission intact, but something told me Karen wasn't quite done yet. That afternoon, I caught her standing across the street, arms folded, staring at the dish like it had personally betrayed her. Her little notebook was back in her hand. I had a feeling something unhinged was brewing behind those oversized sunglasses, and just like that, I knew the next strike wasn't going to be procedural. It was going to be personal. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood settled into an uneasy peace, like the eye of a hurricane pretending to be spraying. The satellite dish continued to operate in silence, never once breaking signal, never once drawing attention from anyone outside the block again. The HOA, now under fresh leadership, was busier cleaning up Karen's mess than enforcing mailbox font regulations. The new president, a mild-mannered accountant named Dale, issued a friendly email every week reminding everyone to recycle, and not once did he mention national security. In fact, nobody mentioned the dish at all anymore. It was as if the entire community agreed to look the other way, like pretending it was just a fancy bird feeder for astronauts. But I didn't forget, not just because of the equipment I was still actively monitoring, but because Karen wasn't gone. She was quiet, yes, but silence from someone like her wasn't surrender. It was reloading. The signs were subtle at first. A new social media page popped up under the name Anonymous HOA Watchdog, and while it never mentioned my name directly, it was filled with vague threats about unauthorized intelligence gathering, mine frequency zones, and community infiltration. The writing style was all too familiar: flourished capital letters, overuse of exclamation points, and accusations against those who wear patriotism like camouflage. Then came the weird lawn deliveries, a box of aluminum foil left on my doorstep with a note that said, "You'll need this soon." A pamphlet shoved in my mailbox outlining non-lethal ways to disable surveillance nodes. I logged each one and sent copies to the agency, but nothing crossed the line. No direct threats, just enough to signal she hadn't given up. But what Karen didn't know was that the government wasn't done either. Her outbursts, viral videos, and accidental signal interference had landed her on a more permanent radar. The agency informed me she was now listed under a domestic watch protocol, not criminal, but flagged for further behavior. They had also added a secondary layer of security to the dish, something no one would see but everyone would regret touching. I was given a remote trigger device disguised as a garage door opener that could lock the entire system down in less than 3 seconds. Not that I thought I'd ever need it. Until the HOA community picnic. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, the type of day where everyone brought folding chairs and casseroles to the Central Park. The bounce house was inflated, kids ran wild, and a local band played dad rock covers under a string of flags. I had just finished chatting with Dale about whether or not to install speed bumps near the roundabout when I noticed a woman in oversized sunglasses lingering near the punch table. Her hair was dyed a different shade, her outfit was more muted, but the moment she turned and I saw the twitch in her left eye, I knew Karen. She hadn't technically been banned from community events, but her presence was not exactly welcomed. Still, she drifted through the gathering like a ghost looking for someone to haunt. I kept an eye on her. She didn't speak to anyone. She just observed, studied. At one point, I saw her pick up a paper plate, walk toward the dessert table, and then double back when she noticed the satellite dish, fully visible from the park, glinting in the sun just beyond the tree line. Her lips moved, muttering something to herself, and then she walked briskly away. The real action didn't start until sunset. Most families had gone home, the band packed up, the bounce house deflated like a dying whale. I helped stack chairs with a few neighbors, and then returned home just in time to catch an alert ping on my phone. Backyard motion sensor, quadrant 3. I opened the camera feed, half expecting a raccoon. Instead, I saw her, Karen, dressed all in black, crouched beside my fence, clutching what looked like a length of wire and a large duffel bag. I didn't even hesitate. I hit the panic trigger. The result was instant. The backyard lights erupted in blinding white. A sharp, shrill tone pierced the air, followed by a low mechanical voice from a hidden speaker declaring, "This area is under federal protection. Step away and remain still." Karen froze like a statue, her eyes wide and reflecting every lumen of panic. Within 30 seconds, the unmarked vehicle rolled up again. No sirens, just quiet professionalism. 2 men got out. She tried to bolt, but she didn't get far. The agents intercepted her halfway through the neighbor's tulip bed. She yelled about her rights, the HOA charter, her fear of psychic broadcast. But this time, no one came to her defense. Not even Muffin the poodle. She wasn't arrested, but she was officially detained for questioning. And this time, they had real evidence. The duffel bag was full of tools, copper wire, and a small electromagnetic scrambler, likely something she purchased from the same place she got her infrared goggles. She was taken away quietly, with only a few neighbors watching from windows. The next morning, The HOA board issued a formal community statement. It read, "Recent events involving an unauthorized attempt to tamper with protected infrastructure have resulted in permanent removal from all HOA activities. Legal counsel has advised us to cease contact with the individual involved." That same morning, I received a package. Inside was a plaque on polished wood engraved in brass. It read, "For continued civilian support of national security initiatives through Department of Defense." Beneath it, a handwritten note. "Your neighbor has been reassigned to a quieter location." The handwriting was elegant, familiar, my handler's subtle signature. I placed the plaque on my mantel beside my Army retirement flag and the now famous surveillance gnome. Things went back to normal after that. Karen's house was put on the market quietly. Rumors swirled that she moved to a remote town in Nevada, somewhere with no satellite coverage and a deep distrust of microwaves. The dish stayed, the signal stayed strong, and every so often, someone new to the neighborhood would ask, "Hey, what's that thing on your roof?" I'd smile and say, "Weather balloon uplink." They'd nod like they understood, and we'd move on. The LOA became less about nonsense and more about potlucks. People smiled more. The lawn violations dropped by 80%. Someone even started a newsletter called The Dish Patch as a joke, with neighborhood stories and barbecue tips. I was invited to every event, asked to judge chili contests, and once even got a Most Mysterious Neighbor award at the Halloween block party. I wore a Men in Black costume, and no one questioned the irony. And as for the dish, well, it still does its job.